Trinidad and Tobago and Minister of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development. Her Honour, Ms. Deborah Thomas Felix, President of the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago. Mrs. Joy Prasad Myers, Permanent Secretary Acting, Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development. Mr. Ian McIntyre, SC, Chief Parliamentary Counsel. Mr. Lennox Marcel, Attorney at Law and Industrial Relations Specialist, and incoming Chairman of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee. Incoming members of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, Dr. Giovanni De Cola, Officer in Charge, ILO Decent Work Team, and Office of the Caribbean for the Caribbean. Mr. Harry Suknanan, Head Conciliation and Labour Relations, Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development. Representatives of workers, representatives of employers, representatives of the International Labour Organization, colleagues from the Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Avril Rahim, and I'm Senior Legal Advisor at the Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development. I'm delighted to welcome you this morning to this momentous occasion, the launch of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee. I say momentous because the last time this committee existed, or rather it was established from 1972 to 1980, a long time ago. And so the ministry is extremely honored and happy to host today's proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the Permanent Secretary Acting of the Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development, Mrs. Joy Prasad Myers. Mrs. Myers joined the Ministry of Labour in June 2011 as Deputy Permanent Secretary, coming from the Office of the Prime Minister, and assumed the position of Permanent Secretary Acting in the Ministry in mid-January 2012. We welcome to the podium to deliver the opening remarks, Mrs. Joy Prasad Myers.
Thank you, Avril. The Honourable Errol McLeod, Acting Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Minister of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development. Her Honour Deborah Thomas Felix, President of the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago, Permanent Secretaries and other senior officials representing various ministries, Mr. Lennox Marcel, Attorney at Law, Industrial Relations Specialist, and incoming Chairman of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, incoming members of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, Dr. Giovanni De Cola, Officer in Charge, ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean, Mr. Harry Suknanan, Head Conciliation and Labour Relations, Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development, representatives of employers, representatives of workers, colleagues from the Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all. We gather here today to launch the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee. This is historic. Over 30 years have passed since the last committee went out of existence. In recognizing the historic nature of this event, we also recognize that women and men who make history do not have the time to write it. In our case, we will follow Winston Churchill's advice when he said that history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Today, we are making and writing history. Whether we are happy with being part of history, creating history, or writing history, our very presence here today signals our acceptance of being authors of a new chapter in the history of industrial relations in Trinidad and Tobago. As such, on behalf of the Ministry of Labour and the Small and Micro Enterprise Development, it is my distinct pleasure to officially welcome you this morning to the launch of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee. Just over a month ago, some of you would have joined us for the appointment ceremony for chairpersons and members of 4 committees and councils, another historic event which demonstrated the Ministry's commitment to promoting decent work and enhancing participatory governance through social dialogue. In keeping with this thrust, as well as the government's focus on accelerating the process of labor legislation reform, the Honourable Minister of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development has personally challenged the launch and personally championed the launch of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee since assuming office. It is also historic that a committee such as this is being launched under the auspices of a veteran trade unionist who dedicated more than 30 years of his life to the struggle for workers' rights and freedoms, and who has been an ardent advocate for the reform of the Industrial Relations Act, Chapter 8801, and who is today acting as Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Indeed, this is a historic event. While we have termed this event as a launch, some may deem it a reconstitution of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, since according to my understanding, Cabinet agreed to the appointment of the committee in 1972, and its last term ended in 1980, approximately 32 years ago. 32 years is definitely a long time, indeed over one generation. It goes without saying that the industrial relations climate in Trinidad and Tobago has been transformed since the enactment of the IRA in 1972. In a previous period of our history, we spoke of master, servant, factories, but today we speak of employers, employees, workers, partnership, productivity, social dialogue, and decent work. Against the background of globalization and changes in the labor market, including growth of new forms of employment, flexible work arrangements, the emergence of new types of employment relationships, and the fervent campaign to promote rights in the workplace, the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee has a very challenging and demanding task ahead in executing its mandate as provided for in Section 81 of the IRA to keep the Act under review with a view to ensuring its development and reform. We are all aware of the resounding calls by the social partners to modernize certain provisions of the Act to allow for a more enabling and facilitating industrial relations climate in Trinidad and Tobago. As Acting Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development, I am particularly pleased to be part of this ceremony for the distribution of instruments of appointment as signed by the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the chairperson and members of this esteemed committee. With such a critical committee appointed, we are one step ahead in fulfilling the mission of the ministry to facilitate an enabling environment that supports employment creation, sustainable enterprise development, and employee well-being in a safe, peaceful, and productive work environment. In particular, we expect to make substantial progress towards achieving one of our strategic goals, and that of providing a legislative framework that supports decent work with the pioneering efforts of this committee. I take this opportunity to congratulate the members of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee to be appointed, led by the highly capable Attorney at Law, Mr. Lennox Marcel, and comprising a blend of persons with significant experience, practical knowledge, and a sincere passion to improve relations between employees and employers, as well as the framework in which such relations can flourish and grow. I look forward to working with all of you as we strive towards decent work for all, prosperity, respect for human rights and the rule of law for the welfare of our society. In closing, I would like to emphasize that the only history that is worth anything is the history we make today. I thank you.
The tone of this launch. We now turn to the core of this morning's proceedings, the presentation of instruments of appointment to the chairman and members of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee. The instruments of appointment have been duly signed by the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, chairpersons are appointed for a period of 2 years with effect from the date of the instruments. I kindly ask the Honourable Errol McLeod, Acting Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Minister of Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise Development, to join us at the front of the stage for the distribution of instruments. Mr. Marcel, if you could kindly also join us at the front of the stage, and I will humbly ask members or incoming members of the committee to please stand and come forward when your name is called. Ready? Yeah. Mr. Lennox A. Marcel, Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Orville Carrington, Member. Mr. Vincent Cabrera, Member. Mr. Kester Nanku, Member. Mr. Jonathan Walker, Member. Ms. Hazel Elcock Eiffel, Member. Ms. Hyacinth Guy, Member. Mr. Krishandath Mahabir, Member. Dr. Jerome Tilak Singh, Member. Dr. Roosevelt J. Williams, Member. And Mr. Mukesh Basdeo, Member. Thank you kindly, Honourable Acting Prime Minister, Mr. Marcel. Kindly note, folks, that there will be a little media session at the end of our proceedings where the necessary photographs and so on of the members and the committee will be taken. One of the first duties of the newly appointed chairman of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee is to give remarks in his new position. Mr. Lennox Marcel, attorney at law and industrial relations specialist, brings to the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee a wealth of experience and knowledge. He obtained his MSc Industrial Relations and Personnel Management from the London School of Economics, University of London in 1982. Coincidentally, at the same time when the last committee would have demitted office, perhaps it was to come. He has lectured at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and continues to lecture at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, in the MSc Labour and Employment Relations, in the area specifically of international labour law. He is also a former Director of Research, I understand, at the Industrial Court. I understand he held that position for 13 years and was at the Industrial Court for a total of 17 years. He now manages his own consultancy and private practice. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to invite to the podium to bring remarks the newly appointed chairman of the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, Mr. Lennox Marcel.
Thank you very much, Chairperson and Senior Legal Advisor in the Ministry, Mrs. Avril Rahim, the Honourable Acting Prime Minister and Minister of Labour, Mr. Errol McLeod, Her Honor, Mrs. Deborah Thomas Felix, President of the Industrial Court, Mrs. Joy Prasad Myers, Permanent Secretary, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Labour, all the other permanent secretaries and senior members of ministries who are